The once beautiful moon of Derry's 9 had become a graveyard. Its towering jungles had been blasted into skeletal trees. Its vibrant rivers now turned to boiling mud. For weeks, the planet had been contested by both Terran and Volturi forces, a war over resources, orbital supremacy, and pride. But no side could claim victory. Only ruin remained. Siva, a young scout of the Volturi species, lay hidden beneath the smoldering wreckage of a troop carrier. Her armor was cracked, her left leg mangled from a collapsing tree during the last bombardment. Her blue-gray skin was streaked with dried blood, and a gash ran from her cheek to her neck. Every breath burned in her chest. She had once been proud-trained. To endure, to track, to fight, but now, all she could do was crawl. Hours had passed since the last orbital strike turned the jungle into a wasteland. Her squad had been decimated in seconds. One moment they were advancing toward a Terran relay point, the next, fire from above erased everything she knew. She remembered screams, the smell of burning moss, and the sight of her commander's armor. Melting as he was vaporized mid-sentence, she didn't know why she'd survived. A fluke of cover, perhaps, an accident of physics. But survival didn't feel like a gift. It felt like punishment. The Volturi were not known for compassion. Weakness was shame. Injured soldiers were expected to die with dignity or crawl back to their own kind without complaint. But Siva had no one. Her long-range comms were shattered. Her rations were gone. And worst of all, her own people would likely abandon her now as a liability. She tried to move again, dragging herself across the shattered forest floor. Her arms trembled from the effort. She made it a few meters before collapsing behind the burnt-out hull of an old Terran supply truck. Her body trembled as a wave of despair crashed over her. "I don't want to die," she whispered. It wasn't a prayer. The Volturi didn't believe in gods. But it was the first time she'd spoken aloud since the battle. Then she heard footsteps, crunch. Crunch, crunch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. She reached weakly for her dagger, half buried in the dirt. Her eyes scanned the gloom, trying to see through the dust and flickering embers. She expected an enemy patrol, maybe a scavenger. Maybe even one of the merciless machines both factions deployed to clean up survivors. But what stepped into view wasn't a drone. And it wasn't a VALTARI. It was a human soldier. Tall, tan-skinned, wearing tattered armor with the Terran 47th Recon insignia. His helmet was clipped to his belt, revealing a face lined with exhaustion and soot. His eyes, a piercing gray, swept the area and landed on her. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Siva's hand remained on the dagger, ready to strike, though she knew she couldn't even lift it. The human didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't shout. Instead, he crouched slowly, arms open. "You're hurt," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was deep, but gentle. She didn't understand all his words, but his tone said enough. Still, Siva braced for pain. For a bullet, for a blade. Instead, he reached out. His hand hovered in front of her, steady and unthreatening. She flinched at first, her instincts screaming. But something about him, his calm, the lack of fear or hatred in his eyes, froze. Her dot. Then slowly, she lifted her hand and placed it in his dot. It was a simple gesture. A moment. But to Siva, it felt like crossing a galaxy. His touch was warm, not demanding, not cruel. Just present. He gripped her hand, not to take, not to overpower, but to comfort. It was the first kind touch she'd felt since leaving her. "Homeworld. My name's Nathan," he said, gently beginning to check her injuries. "You're gonna be okay." She didn't understand the words, not yet. But the way he said them, it felt like the first light after a long night. As he began to lift her carefully into his arms, Siva stared into the burning sky and realized something strange. She didn't want to die anymore. Nathan carried Siva through the smoldering remains of the forest, her weight light but her pain heavy. Every so often, she winced or hissed, her injured leg twitching involuntarily, but she didn't resist. Whether it was exhaustion or something else, she had stopped fearing him. He was careful, deliberate with every step. Debris still crackled underfoot. Smoke wafted around them, choking and bitter, but Nathan moved with practiced ease. He had walked through too many battlefields to let one more shake him. Siva, barely conscious now, stared up at him through blurred vision. His face, though weathered by war, looked human in a way the Valtari had never been taught to expect, gentle, concerned. Not the face of a killer. Not the ape beast described in Valtari war briefings. After nearly 2 kilometers of slow trudging, Nathan reached the edge of a collapsed ridge where a Terran scout outpost lay half buried beneath scorched trees. The small prefab unit designed for quick deployment and fast retreats was miraculously still intact on one side. Its emergency beacon was long dead, but its inner walls stood strong against the wind. He eased open the emergency door, kicked aside broken panels, and laid Siva down on the cold metal floor. She groaned weakly but didn't pull away. Nathan dropped his pack and got to work. With careful, almost mechanical precision, he cracked open a medkit, activated the internal light panel, and pulled out a set of tools. It wasn't the first time he'd treated battlefield wounds, but this was the first time he was doing it for an alien. He glanced at her face still, alert but wary, and held up a syringe of mild anesthetic. "This'll help with the pain," he said. She tensed. She didn't know what he was saying, but she understood the intent. Still, her species distrusted drugs, seeing them as shortcuts for the weak. Nathan must have sensed her hesitation. Instead of forcing it, he set the syringe down. "Your call," he murmured. "I'm not here to make you do anything." She blinked at him, confused. Then, slowly, she nodded. Nathan injected the dose near her leg. A slight shudder passed through her body as the pain dulled. Her breath became less ragged. Next, he examined her leg. The break was clean but severe. He aligned the bones as gently as he could and secured a splint made from carbon struts pulled from the collapsed roof. The whole time, he talked softly, not because he expected her to understand, but because he understood trauma, knew that the worst part of pain wasn't the wound but the silence that followed. "You're lucky," he said. "The strike didn't get you full force. Bet your people think you're dead, though. Left you here." At those words, something flickered in Siva's eyes. She didn't know the exact meaning, but she caught the tone. "Left you here." Yes, they had. Her gaze drifted to the ceiling, where the dim light hummed faintly. This station felt strange. Clean, dry, protected. The war outside sounded distant now. Still real, but muffled. Nathan brought her a canteen and a ration bar, gesturing to eat. She sniffed it suspiciously. It smelled salty, foreign. She hesitated, then took a small bite. It wasn't good. But it was food. She finished it in silence. Later, as the winds howled and night fell, Nathan took the far side of the room, giving her space. He stripped off his armor, revealing a scar-covered body worn from years of combat. Siva watched him from the corner of her eye. How many had he killed? How many had he saved? She didn't know. But when the cold crept into the shelter, she felt it, the deep, aching emptiness of being alone in a galaxy full of enemies. Then she looked at the human again. He wasn't sleeping, just lying still, staring at the ceiling. She whispered, voice cracking. "Siva." He looked over. "That your name?" She nodded. He smiled faintly. "Nathan." They didn't speak more, but in the silence between them, something began to take root, fragile as glass but real. Not alliance, not trust. Not yet, but the beginning of it. The days that followed blurred together in a fragile rhythm, wounded silence broken only by the soft hiss of bandages, the scraping of ration bars being opened, and the occasional gust of wind shaking the walls of the ruined outpost. Nathan and Seva survived barely, but something deeper than survival began to grow between them. It started with simple exchanges. Nathan taught her a few basic words in English, carefully enunciated and accompanied by gestures. He'd point to the water canister and say, "Water." She'd repeat it in her gravelly, lilting accent. Then he'd nod, and she'd flash something just short of a smile. In return, she taught him Valtari words. Her language was more tonal, more gesture-based, spoken partly with the hands and throat. Nathan struggled at first, but she was patient. When he pronounced her word for safe correctly, she tapped her chest and gave a slow nod, the Valtari equivalent of applause. Despite the physical wounds still healing, they laughed, awkwardly, briefly, but they did. The nights were colder, now that the outpost's power reserves were nearly gone. Nathan offered her the emergency blanket. She refused. He rolled his eyes and draped it over them both without asking. That night, they slept sitting against opposite walls. But just a few feet closer than the night before, Seva's legs slowly regained strength. The human's rough but clever splint worked, and with help, she could now hobble short distances. Nathan encouraged her progress without being pushy. Sometimes they'd sit together outside during the long twilight hours, where the sky stayed bruised orange from the lingering atmosphere fires. He'd sketch diagrams in the dirt earths. Moon, a human dwelling, the silhouette of a tree with green leaves, and explain things with a mix of words and mimg. She listened, eyes curious, sometimes skeptical, often amused. In exchange, Seva drew the spiraling cliffs of Vatsur, the sacred wind caves of her people. She carved symbols into the dirt with a stick, her family crest, her warrior mark, her name before combat. Nathan couldn't read them, but he watched as if they were sacred texts. One afternoon, Nathan pulled out a tiny scorched device from his satchel, a Terran music chip. The speaker was barely functional, but he made it work. A soft hum filled the air, a slow, melodic guitar, one of Earth's old songs. No lyrics, just notes that rose and fell like gentle waves. Seva froze, unsure what to make of it. Then she closed her eyes. It reminded her of wind through the silvergrass fields, of a lullaby sung by her mother before war had stolen such things. She reached out, not toward the music, but toward Nathan. Just her hand, palm up. He hesitated, then took it. No words, no promises. Just warmth. Just presence. Later, as the sun dipped behind the smoke-choked horizon, Seva finally asked haltingly in broken English, "Why help?" "Me?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. He leaned back, looking up at the canopy of stars that struggled to pierce the haze. "Because you were alone," he said. "And I know what that feels like." He paused, then added, "And because you reached for my hand." Seva was quiet. Then, softly, she replied in Valtari, "That was the first hand ever offered to me." Nathan didn't understand the words, but he saw it in her face: pain, memory, gratitude. She had been raised to believe humans were beasts, soulless things wrapped in meat and machinery. But this man, this quiet, stubborn, scar-covered human, had treated her with more care than her own commanders ever had. He didn't see her as a prisoner or a threat. He saw her as someone worth saving. That night, as they prepared to sleep, Seva reached out once more. Not just for warmth, not for comfort, but to choose connection. Nathan took her hand without hesitation. Two survivors. Two soldiers from opposite sides. No longer enemies, not quite lovers, but something in between, something new, forged in ash and silence and shared. Pain. And though the war still raged beyond the mountains for the first time since it began, they both felt something like peace. The moment of peace between them couldn't last forever. The war outside was still real, and it was catching up. Nathan knew the signs: drones flying lower, COMM signals growing louder, a shifting tone in the battlefield static. Something was coming, something big. Siva sensed it too. Her healing had gone well. Her leg could now bear weight for short walks, but not much more. They both knew she wouldn't survive alone if the outpost was hit again. Nathan spent hours poring over a tattered map, checking coordinates with an old beacon device. Then he found it: a Terran evac point scheduled for extraction in less than 48 hours, only 30 kilometers south. That was their chance. "We have to move," he told her. She understood enough. Her expression hardened: no fear, only determination. She nodded once, then surprised him by rising to her feet unassisted. He built a crude sled using a broken hoverboard chassis, spare armor plating, and leftover polyfiber cable. When she tired, he'd pull her. When she could walk, they'd move. Side by side. They packed what little they had: medkit, water, a single meal bar, and the tiny music chip, which Siva insisted on keeping. That night, they stood at the door of the outpost one last time. "Ready?" he asked. She didn't answer with words. She simply reached out, hand open. He took it. The journey through the blasted jungle was a trial of endurance. They navigated terrain that was more ash than soil. Fallen trees crackled underfoot. The air was dry, thick with dust, and a faint metallic scent from old plasma strikes. The sun barely pierced the smoke. Siva struggled but never complained. Nathan admired her grit. Each time she stumbled, she rose again. When they rested, he checked her wounds, made jokes, and told her about Earth. "Mountains that touch the clouds," he said, "and oceans that go on forever." She stared at him like he was describing a dream. And maybe, in a way, he was. Then, halfway through the second day, they were spotted. A dark shape buzzed above a recon drone, Valtari model. It hovered, scanned, and screamed off into the clouds. Moments later, more followed. But these weren't scouts. These were kill units. Nathan grabbed Siva's hand and ran. Behind them, the sky lit up as plasma bolts scorched the forest. Trees shattered. Ground exploded. Siva pulled a small pistol from Nathan's belt, the same one he'd given her days earlier just in case. She fired 2 blasts, taking down the lead drone. Nathan shot another. A third clipped his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Siva screamed, not in her native tongue, but in broken English. "No!" She dragged him behind cover as the last drone swept overhead and vanished into the sky. Smoke filled the air. Nathan lay on the ground, bleeding and gasping. Siva knelt beside him, her fingers trembling as she pulled off his armor plate and applied coagulant gel. Her training kicked in, and she worked quickly, efficiently. "You rest," she said. "My turn now." It was the first full sentence she had ever spoken in English. Hours later, the evac beacon finally came into view, barely visible on a rocky hilltop. A Terran shuttle hovered above, scanning for survivors. The ramp was open. The roar of its engines drowned out everything else. Nathan was nearly unconscious, his arm slung over Siva's shoulder as she half dragged, half carried him up the incline. A Terran Marine spotted them and raised his rifle. "Valtari!" he shouted. Siva froze. Nathan coughed. "She's with me." The Marine hesitated. More troops emerged. They looked confused, cautious. One medic stepped forward, lowering his scanner. Human life signs confirmed. Wounded. "And the alien?" "She saved my life," Nathan said, voice weak but firm. "She comes with me." The medic looked at his squad leader. After a tense pause, the officer gave a nod. Fine, both aboard. No time to argue. Siva helped Nathan onto the shuttle. As the doors hissed shut and they lifted off, she looked out through the glass VIEWPORT. Below them, Dares 9 burned. Her homeworld, or what was left of it, faded into smoke and ash. She didn't cry, but she did lean into Nathan's shoulder. Earth was unlike anything Siva had imagined. She had seen the planet from orbit once during her early military years, an azure world wrapped in white clouds, pulsing with life. But now on the surface, living among humans, she discovered something deeper than beauty. She discovered healing. Nathan had been placed in a recovery center near the edge of a rewilded forest reserve in North Cascadia, a peaceful region far from the front lines. Thanks to Terran diplomacy programs, Siva was allowed to stay by his side as a non-combatant refugee. She was technically still a former enemy, but her actions on Dares 9 had bought her something rare in wartime, a chance. For weeks they stayed in the same quiet medical wing. Nathan's injuries healed slowly. Siva, though physically better, fought through nightmares, culture shock, and the hollow ache of loss. Her people hadn't reached out. Not a single transmission. She didn't even know if the Voltari High Command had survived. She was alone, but not quite. Nathan never left her side. He took her on slow walks through the garden paths near the edge of the facility. He showed her Earth's plants: lavender, pine, cedar, and their strange scents. He told her stories about Earth's oceans and deserts, about animals that could fly and others that sang. When he noticed she enjoyed drawing, he gave her a sketch pad, and in return, she taught him how to carve Voltari stone glyphs. She showed him how her people wove stories into cloth with fine strands of shell silk. He listened, always. One day, as they sat beside a sunlit pond, Nathan asked, "You ever want to go back?" She didn't answer right away. Her hand brushed the surface of the water, watching the ripples spread. "No one there for me," she said softly, her English slow but clear now. "Only here." He didn't press her. He just nodded. That night, she took his hand, not because she was afraid or cold or grateful, but because it felt right. Months passed. They were relocated to a quiet outpost housing veterans and displaced persons. There, among Terrans and a handful of other alien refugees, they began to build a life. Their home was small, a two-room shelter with solar panels, stone walls, and a garden that became Siva's domain. She planted Voltari vines alongside Terran vegetables. The vines adapted to Earth's soil, curling gently toward the sun. A metaphor, Nathan once said. Inside, they filled their space with drawings, carvings, relics of both worlds. The music chip still played, though it now looped. A dozen Earth songs Siva had grown to love. She began humming along off-key, but heartfelt. Their bond deepened. Slowly but unmistakably. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was belonging, it was home. One evening, beneath a quiet red-orange sunset, they sat atop the nearby hill, watching the stars begin to emerge. Nathan had brought 2 mugs of tea, earth-grown mint, Voltari spice. They drank in silence. Then Nathan turned to her, nerves flickering in his voice. "Siva, I know this world isn't yours. I know I'm not Voltari, but I want you here, with me, always." She blinked, watching him closely. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small carved stone, shaped like a joining crest, a human gesture mimicked in her culture with his own spin. "I don't have a ceremony. I don't even know the right words. But I know this, wherever you are, that's home for me. So, will you stay with me?" Siva didn't cry. She never did, but her hands trembled as she accepted the stone. Instead of words, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. Most sacred gesture among the Voltari, a vow beyond language, a bond beyond species. "Yes," she whispered, "I stay." Years later, stories would be told of a human soldier who rescued an alien enemy and built peace not through treaties, but through touch. Of a Volturi warrior who chose love over vengeance, growth over grief. And on the edge of a quiet earth valley, two hands once strangers remained forever entwined. Because sometimes the smallest gesture a hand held out in the dark can change not just lives, but the galaxy itself.